Welcome to today's show. Up first here, we've got along the Arctic coast, the entire stretch of the Arctic coast is a wind chill advisory out for tonight until 6 a.m. Sunday morning for wind chills to 55 degrees below zero anywhere along the Arctic coast tonight. Winter weather advisory here for the eastern North Slope, northeastern Brooks Range areas for areas of snow and blowing snow, reducing visibilities down to half mile at times. Otherwise, out here, Point Hope, Cape Lisburn, Kivlina, on down into Kotzebue, as well as the Seward Peninsula, Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast. It's blizzard warnings and winter storm warnings for heavy wind and snow through these areas, with the winds, of course, creating visibilities and blowing snow down to a quarter mile or less at times, and along with some pretty good snowfall occurring in this area. And this is out for tonight through tomorrow and into Sunday night as well. The winter weather advisory here farther to the east there over eastern Norton Sound and up over the Noaa Valley area. Moving on to satellite imagery, you can see a lot of moisture coming northward, trying to shift to the northeast here with some high cirrus here coming into the central interior, basically ridging aloft up actually right through the western interior here, and then this coming over the top. And then nothing but sunshine, clear skies, cold temperatures over the interior areas up to eastern Arctic coast and into the Arctic as well, with a lot of clear skies into the Gulf of Alaska, down across the Panhandle. Still some clouds down here over the southern areas, but those are even dissipating during the afternoon hours today. Very cold start to the day over interior Alaska. Bettles down to 45 degrees below zero for an overnight low. Fairbanks was something like 35 below. And Tanana about 45 below zero, I believe, or 44 below zero there. And then even into the minus 20s, lower minus 20, some areas of south central Alaska, around 20 below Kenai Soldotna and up around Talkeetna, Willow area. But otherwise, temperatures are recovering pretty nicely with the maximum sunshine today over much of the interior, but staying on the cold side. And then this system out to the west, most of the energy going northward, trying to push eastward here a little bit, but it's not going to make too much inland progress here over the next couple of days. It starts to weaken. Pretty strong gradient out here, pulling warm air northward with winds gusting 35 to 50 miles per hour here from the eastern Aleutians and in advance of the cold front there. Up toward St. Lawrence Island, snow and blowing snow, and that extends in across the Seward Peninsula to the northwest coast. And then quieter conditions back out there to the west with another surge of cold air coming into the western Aleutians. Otherwise dry, variable clouds, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, a lot of sunshine here over the interior, and then you pick up the mid and high level clouds. This precipitation area, pretty light that's getting into the Kobuk Valley there, just flurries but dry up over the central and eastern Arctic coast. Sunshine across the Panhandle. Winds a little gusty here for the channeled areas on the northern southeast coast and a little bit on the North Gulf Coast as well, but nothing too terribly strong. And for tonight, even a tighter gradient here over the southeast coast. So there are, I believe, storm warnings out for, I think, tonight for Lynn Canal and Passage Canal. Otherwise, cold temperatures back below zero here, all of the central and eastern interior up to the eastern Arctic coast. Milder with the increasing clouds and southerly flow here as you head west, but still cold enough for snow and blowing snow, blizzard conditions, St. Lawrence Island, into the Yukon Delta, northward there across the Seward Peninsula, into the Noaa Valley and northwest coast. And then a mixture of precipitation right along here near Nunivak Island southward, just solid rain for the Alaska Peninsula, Pribilofs into the eastern Aleutians. Scattered showers, much lighter winds tonight for the central Aleutians, and then back into the snow showers farther to the west. For tomorrow, this front makes a jog to the east, but the moisture doesn't get too much farther inland as the whole system begins to weaken. High pressure aloft, holding it back to the west. Also at the surface here, about 1,040 millibar high over the Yukon. So that's going to keep the central east side in the mostly sunny conditions, sky conditions there. Very light winds now along the North Gulf Coast and even into the Gulf of Alaska and the Northeast Pacific, looking at pretty light winds. Less gradient over the Panhandle tomorrow for diminishing winds there, but very windy conditions. Again, south to southeast winds anywhere from 30 to 55 miles per hour occurring. And then the temperature should rise enough for the wind chill advisory to end for the Arctic coast. Rain may be heavy at times around Cold Bay, at least the upslope areas of the Alaska Peninsula. Showers back to the west. And for Monday, this whole system really starts to fall apart, especially the northern portion here as the precip now backs out to the west, and just some light snow possible there from the northwest coast. Areas of mixed precipitation right along mostly the Yukon Delta coast, pulling off the Kuskokwim Delta coast. Dry conditions down into Bristol Bay. Periods of rain for the Alaska Peninsula. Showers for the Pribilofs with pretty light winds. And then a lot of mid and high level moisture starting to pour into the interior here, but southern areas will stay mostly sunny, variably cloudy, you could call it, and North Gulf Coast, nothing but sun for the Panhandle with continued diminishing winds there. And out to the west, a weaker front coming into the far western Aleutians. Lows tonight below zero, inland areas here of south central Alaska. Then it jogs up into the teens to lower 20s for Bristol Bay. Single numbers are actually 10 to 20 for the Panhandle for the lows, followed by highs in the 20s, the lower 30s there, 10 to 15. South Central Alaska, Copper River Basin, into the 20s to upper 30s, near 40 for Bristol Bay tomorrow. Kodiak about 34, followed by lows in the 20s. Upper teens to near 20 for the Kuskokwim Valley area, below zero for Copper River Basin, lows in the teens now, 10 to 15 or 5 to 15 South Central Alaska, a little colder over the Panhandle, down to 10 or below in the north and about 20 to the south, followed by highs in the lower 20s, mostly in the 20s across the entire southeast coast. 20s South Central Alaska, cold near Copper River Basin, but out here to the west, upper 30s to lower 40s coming in. That's Sparavon, forecast high 42 there. And for the northern areas, below zero tonight, near zero out toward the Bering Strait. And then highs tomorrow, 15 to 25 in the central interior, and in the single numbers coming above zero for the Arctic coast. And then the lows, just a shade below zero, 0 to 10 below here over the northeast interior, in the mid-teens there for the Tanana Valley, and single numbers out toward the Seward Peninsula, and zero for Monday afternoon, missing, and then upper 20s here for the southwest coast, lower 40s for the lows tonight for the Aleutians under that mild southerly wind flow. Conditions stay mild here right into Monday morning. Low 41 there for Unalaska, and much colder out toward Shimei, the low at 26, 35 for the Pribilofs, followed by highs 30s to upper 40s, warmest near Unalaska.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Well, the marginal VFR and IFRs out here over the Bering Sea. Some of that up to the coastline here, Yukon Kuskokwim Delta, Nunivak Island, Pribilofs down to Atka Island over to the Alaska Peninsula, all in the IFR zone there, right up across St. Lawrence Island to the Bering Strait. Excuse me, marginal VFR, western Arctic coast, interior looking good, mostly, if not completely, VFR from the eastern Arctic coast all the way down into the Gulf of Alaska, Bristol Bay, eastward across all of the southeast coast. For the afternoon, VFR continues. All of southern Alaska here. Marginal VFR may come up toward Capes or over toward just west of Yakutat there, but really nothing significant. VFR flying from the North Gulf Coast, central interior, all the way up to the eastern Arctic coast. And the lower conditions still out here to the west. IFR band narrowing a little bit here, but still extending from the Bering Strait all the way down to the central eastern Aleutians and the western Alaska Peninsula. And for Monday morning, patchy marginal VFR here over the interior, otherwise staying pretty good conditions with VFR. IFR holding out here along the eastern Bering Sea. There from the northwest coast down to southern Seward Peninsula, that southerly flow there, and all the way down to the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula, becoming marginal VFR to the west and even VFR for Shimei and Attu. Panhandle, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island. Looking good. VFR flying through Monday morning, and that'll continue into the afternoon, especially for the Panhandle here. Got a band of possible marginal VFR up around Yakutat and also maybe in Cook Inlet, possibly. That'd be low cloud conditions there. that could develop along with maybe some fog. But over here, got some IFR now over toward the eastern border, central Arctic coast, and but the main area of IFR with the storminess staying out here to the west over the eastern Bering Sea. Now, not even quite making it to the southwest coast now, maybe clipping Cape Newenham, Nunivak Island more likely down to the central eastern Aleutians. A little bit farther up toward Kodiak Island now, some marginal VFR spreading over that area, coming up in toward the Barren Islands. Passes tomorrow. Good VFR through the Brooks Range. All the passes open. North and south entrance, both Adigan and Anatuvik. Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR as well. Entire Alaska Range is open with ceilings visibilities unlimited. Many of the areas here, rainy, good VFR. Windy, VFR. Isabel, VFR. And Mentasta, VFR as well. Tanita, VFR. Portage, VFR. Chilcoot and White, VFR in either approach. And for the freezing levels, southerly flow out here ahead of that storm system, and on the western side of the upper level ridge building up that's going to shift over the central interior, anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 feet, all the way up 2,000 feet up to the Bering Strait, 6,000 feet just south of the Alaska Peninsula, and then at the surface here, well south of the mainland, even Kodiak Island, cutting across the Gulf and just clipping Prince of Wales Island. And looking at icing, all that's going to be out here to the west, some areas of isolated moderate rime icing from the northwest coast, Point Hope, Cape Lisburne, Kivalina, Red Dog, on down through the Bering Strait, Seward Peninsula, chance of some icing, western interior here. Mostly along the coast, possibly in over the inland areas of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and then along the Alaska Peninsula here, kind of another surge coming up in that southerly flow, catching Unalaska Island, and then possible icing threats out here over the west central Aleutians. Otherwise, the remainder of the state looking pretty much icing, or it will be icing free over the interior Panhandle Gulf of Alaska. Jet stream, upper level high pressure here right over southern Cook Inlet, give or take, at this elevation. Anyway, you got good northerly flow up to 105 knots there, cutting across just east of Yakutat, and out to the west, south-southwest to north-northeast flow, 95 to 110 knots, and then a trough farther out to the west. 9,000 feet, much the same pattern, sharp ridge right through here, keeping all the storminess out to the west. Southerly 60 to 70 knots there along the west coast areas, lighter out to the west over the Bering Sea and the Aleutians, and then northerly flow 35 to 50 knots over the eastern interior, right along the border down toward Yakutat, and at 3,000 feet. Northerly flow maybe up to 40 knots, kind of a narrow band there here at this elevation, just east of Yakutat. Light wind flow under high pressure.
When you think of a national park, you probably envision wide open natural spaces, undisturbed by human activity. There are indeed such places, but even in some of the most remote areas of a place like Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska, the mark of man is present. Marine debris is a menace to the farthest reaches of our globe, and even designated national park lands are not immune. In the summer of 2009, the Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance, a grassroots conservation organization based in Seward, Alaska, decided to do something about the marine debris fouling the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park. Marine debris coordinator Tim Johnson had first-hand experience with the issue.
The summer before, my wife and I, Michelle, had done a paddle from Seward, sea kayak paddle from Seward to Homer. Really, our eyes were open to some areas that we didn't realize there was so much accumulation. It was very deceiving up front. You couldn't really get a feel for the extent and impact of it. You've got this nice high tide line that's quite pristine, and you really don't get a picture for the impact and the amount of debris in that area until you get behind those storm berms. You get back into the lagoons and the vegetation around those lagoons. And then you see the absolute extent back into that veg and how intertwined and enmeshed these decades of trash deposition. So we were just appalled by that and said we got to get something together on a larger scale.
The Resurrection Bay Conservation Alliance is a local nonprofit community organization, and they have been instrumental in helping the Park Service obtain funding to get larger boats to help move the debris, and they get volunteer labor and organize the work trips. And so it's really a partnership between the Park Service and the community to help get out and really get a project done that in and of itself any one group couldn't do on their own.
Most of that trash was baggable. However, there were large items, huge, piles of hauser line, for example, that we just had to hoist up onto the boat.
The volunteers didn't just bag, haul, and hoist the garbage, but also carefully recorded what types of debris were collected.
In many ways, the debris itself is a resource. Archaeologists use middens, the trash heaps, as a way of analyzing past cultures. And in one sense, marine debris is a form of a midden. It's a trash heap that left for the future would be something that people could use to analyze our culture. It may not say the best things about our culture or everything that we want, but we need to be able to document what we've done so that we can preserve that legacy, make sure that we as a society don't forget what we've been doing.
We had two larger categories of marine debris that we picked up. Commercial fishing means like, say, gill nets, large hauser lines, anything that would be associated with more of a commercial fishing scale. And then the second category was more recreational fishing and household, which would be general plastics, things like that. So we had about a 75% of the commercial fishing marine debris element, and about 25% of the recreational and household further out the bay. And we had the exact opposite the closer we got to Seward. Within the bay, it was about 25% commercial fishing versus 75% recreational fishing and household.
The trash is not just unsightly for park visitors, but also poses threats to wildlife and marine habitat.
Really one of the larger issues now that you go to this plastic that can really get into the food web and affect the food web differently than something like glass.
These substances, for instance, all these polystyrene blocks that are breaking down into all these little crumbly bits are further breaking down on a microscopic level, and how much of an impact that has, in this ecosystem is yet to be determined, but I think it's got pretty high potential.
Well known that sea turtles will eat plastic bags floating in the water. They look like jellyfish to a sea turtle, and obviously a plastic bag doesn't go well in the digestive system of a turtle. Albatross will see small pieces of plastic floating on the surface and think they're small fish and other food sources, and eat that in their stomachs, especially in some of the northwestern Hawaiian islands. They'll find dead albatross that have starved to death with a full stomach, and it's full of pieces of plastic.
We're affecting our local areas this way, but we need to be thinking about it from more of a state and global international scale, and most importantly, to try and focus on prevention of it coming in the first place, because we're just going to see this continuing, to build up on our beaches unless we're able to get a little bit more of an approach on prevention on the front end.
Marine debris is really a global problem, in all the oceans, and there are many different sources. Global shipping is one. Fishing debris from commercial fishing, recreational boating activity on land, stuff blowing off land, washing down streams, people just throwing stuff on the shore.
Though the problem can seem overwhelming, Johnson remains upbeat about making a positive difference.
No, you gotta start locally. You gotta take control of what you can do, and make something with that, and try and move on from there.
Overall, more than 9 tons of debris was removed from the beaches of Kenai Fjords National Park and transported back to Seward to be deposited in a landfill.
People gave a lot to the project in order to make it happen. That was awesome. One of the most amazing experiences I've ever had, being able to put that large of a group of volunteers together, dedicated volunteers to put that much effort and give that much time and pull all the different agencies together to see it all happen was incredible. It was incredible. Yeah, very fulfilling experience.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
In case you didn't notice, I ran out of time before I got to the turbulence graphics, so I'll start it off right here. And tomorrow, pretty easy here. Widespread moderate turbulence here, western and in toward the central interior from the Brooks Range all the way down to the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, including St. Lawrence Island area, and a little bit of bumpy conditions expected here along the north coast of the Panhandle as well. Kind of mechanical turbulence going on of the moderate variety. And for the ice edge today, not much change in Cook Inlet, and still about halfway between Nunivak Island and St. Paul Island, maybe just a shade more, but roughly halfway there. Still hung up over St. Matthew Island. This will continue to back off to the northeast with those southerly winds in the area. And for the coastal water forecasts here for the south coast of the Panhandle for tomorrow, north winds 25 knots, and on the north coast, northeast winds 25 to 30 knots. Storm warnings tonight for Lynn Canal, and then gale warnings tomorrow coming down to 35 knots in the afternoon out of the north. North winds 30 knots, some higher gusts for Stevens Passage, and north winds at 15 knots for Clarence Strait. And for the day Monday, northeast winds 20 knots on the south coast, east-northeasterlies 15 to 20 knots on the north coast. Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, north at 20, north 25 for Stevens Passage, northwest 20 knots for Clarence Strait. And for Prince William Sound tomorrow, light north winds at 10 knots, Cook Inlet, northeast 10 to 25 knots, strongest south of the Forelands, 25-knot northeast winds right into Kamishak Bay. Kodiak Island really laying down wind-wise, variable at 10 knots. And for the North Gulf Coast, variable winds 10 knots for the western North Gulf Coast, north at 20 on the east side around Middleton Island. Barren Islands, west at 15. For the day on Monday, for Prince William Sound, the North Gulf Coast, and northern Cook Inlet, light variable winds at 10 knots, and west winds 15 knots for the Barren Islands, southwest 15 here for Kodiak Island, and Cook Inlet, north variable to north winds at 10 to 15 knots. Again, northerlies 15 south of the Forelands, pretty light and variable north of, or for northern Cook Inlet and Kamishak Bay, northeast at 15 knots. Alaska Peninsula, gale warnings tomorrow. Southeast winds 35 knots, southeast 25-knot winds for the Bristol Bay area there with seas at about 6 feet. And for Monday, still gale warnings for the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast winds 35 knots, southeast 30 for Bristol Bay. And for the Unalaska Island, Gale warnings tomorrow, south winds 35 knots, Unimak Island south at 30 knots, and then 10 to 20 knot southerly winds here for the central Aleutians, western Aleutians, northerlies 25 to 30 knots. And for the western Aleutians on Monday, southwest winds 25 knots, but gale warnings here for the central areas from Amchitka Island to Atka, northwest at 40 knots. And then getting a little more squirrely here around Unimak Island, anywhere from 20 to 30 knots, varying directions. On Alaska Island, pretty uniform southerly winds, 25 to 30 knots. Southwest coast, gale warnings for Sunday, south 35 to 40 knots, south 45 for St. Matthew Island. And for the Pribilof, south winds 25 knots, St. Matthew Island south at 25. For the next day, north winds 25 knots here for the areas of St. Matthew Island and to the west. Otherwise, the Pribilofs, south winds 25 knots, 12-foot seas. Southwest coast, southeast winds 30 to 35 knots, and southeast 25 knots for St. Lawrence Island. And for the Chukchi Sea, south to southeast winds tomorrow up to 45 knots. Otherwise, the central and western Arctic coast, southeast winds at 30 knots. And brisk wind advisories also for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, east 25 to 30 knots. Not much change on Monday. Still east winds 25 to 30 knots for the eastern Arctic coast, central coast, southeast at 25. Western Arctic coast, south winds 20 to 25 knots, and from Cape Thompson to Wales, southeast winds at 25 knots. For tonight, again, blizzard warnings, winter storm warnings out, Yukon Delta, St. Lawrence Island, Seward Peninsula, in toward Norton Sound, and up to the northwest coast, with this strong gradient south to north flow here, clear and cold eastern interior and the Panhandle. And for tomorrow, winds start to subside everywhere here over the eastern part of the state and into the Panhandle. Even out here to the west, still blizzard warning continues up in that area, but rain and breezy conditions for the Alaska Peninsula. And then for Monday, the system really weakening, can't make much eastward progress. Actually, the precipitation field kind of retreating back to.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.